Hi, Dr. Scott Jensen here. I just returned from London, England yesterday after a 3-day conference. It was an inaugural initiative called ARC. And Dr. Jordan Peterson and some of his colleagues have been putting this together for more than a year. And ARC, A-R-C, stands for Alliance for Responsible Citizenship. And I want to talk about that, but I want to start out by saying this. There are people angry all over the world for what's gone on for the last 3.5 years. And they have a right to be angry. A lot of news is coming forth. We can point to all kinds of metrics. But darn it, we need to recognize that when you've got repeat actors and actresses in the world of social media and conventional legacy media and universities and medical schools, when you've got them repeatedly being this, the sky is falling, this repeat doomsayer attitude, and then at some point in time you say, hey, I had it wrong. Can we have a little forgiveness and a little mercy? Well, let's be clear. There are many people who understand that we were in uncharted territory during the COVID-19 pandemic. But we cannot afford to not learn what we should learn from this pandemic. And specifically, that means that lockdowns and suspensions and censorship and mandates were wrong-headed in many situations. Now, there's no question today. I'm sharing just from my heart. This is not representing anyone else, and I'm not speaking to give you medical advice. I'm telling you what I see happen. And you're talking to someone who now is probably the most investigated doctor in the state of Minnesota. And I've been exonerated. All the charges have been dismissed. And I'm on the offense now. I am suing the Minnesota Board of Medical Practice, and I am suing the Attorney General because my First Amendment rights were infringed upon. But what I'm talking about today is that we saw people, frequently the same people, over and over saying, the sky is falling, it's terrible. Well, when you're repeatedly wrong, and when you want to sweep your wrong-headedness under the rug, you don't get to determine the timetable. Sure, I want to forgive, but I don't want to forget. When I look at what happened with lockdowns of kids, when I looked at what happened to physicians being suspended, when I look at what happened to me personally, when I look at the tears and the anguish that I went through, the nights that my wife and I sat looking at each other wondering if I would continue to be able to function as a physician in the days, weeks, and months to come, and when I think of the mandates and the angst that caused, young people to the point of committing suicide, got soldiers kicked out of the military, got people fired from their jobs. When I think of all that, yeah, I get a little angry. And if someone wants to come along and say, hey, can't you be a little merciful? Yeah, I can. But let's keep the horse in front of the cart. You don't get to proclaim your own absolution. People have to own up what happened. And there was a lot of wrong-headedness that was repeated over and over again. Accountability is necessary, or we will repeat what happened over the last 3.5 years. We need to be far more careful before we accuse people of disinformation. We need to understand that misinformation might simply mean that someone's thought or perspective on a Monday might have been demonstrated to not be correct by Friday. That is misinformation, but it's disinformation. That is the deliberate dissemination of information to fool, to trick, and to deceive people. Huge difference. Minnesota Board of Medical Practice, I don't think, spent enough time on that. That's why I'm asking the courts to get involved. So I want to talk about what I learned at ARC, at the London conference, talking to people all around England, United Kingdom. But I want to start with what happened when I got back yesterday afternoon. I want to read a little bit of this letter. Now, this is from Canada. Here's the words. My family has been persecuted. My husband lost his privileges. He lost his job as chief of emergency. His peers reported him to the College of Physicians and Surgeons. I had the chance to hear former prime ministers of Australia in both small groups and larger groups. And Australia is acknowledging that in many ways they went overboard with their policies. So we have Canada, we have Australia, we have this ARC conference. And I'm going to spend more time unpacking what Dr. Jordan Peterson and so many other talented speakers had to say later on in a podcast. But I want to just remind you of something that was repeated over and over again at this ARC conference. And that was the quote by Margaret Mead. Never doubt that a small group of thoughtful, committed individuals can change the world. In fact, it's the only thing that ever has. That's why we gathered for the ARC initiative in Greenwich, in London. For 3 days, we talked, we met, we networked, and we learned. But at the same time, it was fascinating to me that the United Kingdom Parliament was holding an inquiry at the same time. I had a chance to talk with someone who'd been with the BBC, the British Broadcasting Corporation or whatever, for more than a quarter of a century. And he was exceedingly interested in what went on. Here's an article written by Matthew Weaver, October 31st, 2023. Here's what it says. COVID inquiry on Tuesday, 10/31/23. It's amazing what went on. At this inquiry, basically, Dominic Cummings, Patrick Valence talked about what it was like to work with Boris Johnson, the prime minister at the time. Here's some of the things that were said. Sir Patrick Valence, in December 2020, noted, Prime Minister says his party thinks the whole thing is pathetic and COVID is just nature's way of dealing with old people. And I am not entirely sure I disagree with them. So Boris Johnson, Prime Minister, is saying that his party thinks that this is nature's way of dealing with old people, and Boris Johnson goes on to editorialize and say, and I'm not entirely sure I disagree with them. Lee Kane, the Director of Communications, via WhatsApp, the WhatsApp in October 2020. This is what Johnson told Kane. Boris Johnson, the Prime Minister, tells Kane, geez, I must say I've been slightly rocked by some of the data on COVID fatalities. The median age is 82 to 81 for men, 85 for women. That is above life expectancy. So get COVID and live longer. Hardly anyone under 60 goes into hospital, and of those, virtually all survive. And I no longer buy all this NHS overwhelmed stuff. National Health Service, NHS. I no longer buy all this NHS overwhelmed stuff. That was October of 2020. Lee Kane replied, all understood. How does this change the policy? Boris Johnson, it shows we don't go for nationwide lockdowns. So did the lockdowns stop? No. No. That's why we have to call for accountability. The inquiry that was taking place while I was there was shown that Boris Johnson had claimed that the real hero of the film Jaws was the mayor who kept the beaches open when there was a risk of a deadly shark attack. Do you remember the movie Jaws? It was the mayor who kept the beaches open. He wasn't a real attractive figure in that movie. He didn't seem super reasonable or necessarily blessed with equanimity. But Boris Johnson evidently thought that the real hero was the mayor. Is it time to forgive Boris Johnson? Have we had accountability yet? Folks, there are angry people around the world. I met dozens of people from Poland, Austria, Scandinavian countries, Germany, United Kingdom, and I certainly met many, many people from Australia and the United States. I met people from Vietnam. I met people from Japan. And there are angry people all over. So recently, Dr. Vinay Prasad came out and said, doctors and experts who got it wrong during the COVID-19 pandemic. Now, Dr. Prasad is one bright guy. I've really appreciated a lot what he has to say. Now, he's a doctor, is my understanding, in California, and he talks about an interview on the Bill Maher show, Bill Maher, a highly regarded news journalist. And he talked about the interview Bill Maher did with Scott Galloway, a New York University professor. And Dr. Prasad highlighted this quote from Scott Galloway. I was on the board of my kid's school during COVID. I wanted a harsher lockdown policy. In retrospect, I was wrong. The damage to kids of keeping them out of school longer was greater than the risk. But here's the bottom line. We were doing our best. But let's give a little grace and forgiveness for the shit show that was COVID. That was the quote on the Bill Maher show. I appreciate, just as Dr. Prasad did, that Scott Galloway is apologetic. But at the end, he appears to be demanding that he be given grace and forgiveness. For me, very few people got everything all right from day one of the pandemic to when the pandemic sort of fizzled out, depending upon what national leader you listen to. But we need to realize some people were doing the best they could with limited information, and they did not necessarily have any specific conflict of interest other than to simply participate in the conversation in the public square. But there were others, and I'll be honest, I'm angry with some of them. The physicians that screamed for my license to be taken away. And I would reach out to them and say, do you want to get together for a cup of coffee? And I would get crickets from them. These were hypocritical jackasses. These were people who have such a level of hubris and arrogance that they wouldn't get together and have a conversation with me, despite the fact that I sat in the Senate, that I was vice chair of the Health and Human Services Committee. I had access to some information that they didn't have. And ultimately, I was the statewide candidate to run for the Republican Party to be governor of Minnesota. They didn't want to get together, some of these physicians. It's on them. I'll forgive them someday. But I want to make sure that accountability takes place too. So Scott Galloway says, how about a little grace? Okay. Well, what grace is being given to the families whose teenage kids or their sons in their 20s or their daughters in their 20s committed suicide? Where's the grace for them? Where's the grace for me when I was simply trying to do the best job I could of putting information out there and expressing my opinion? Why'd this happen? It happened because of groupthink. It happened because of arrogance. It happened because of people who are accustomed to being listened to, perhaps more than they should be, simply because they have fancy letters behind their names. Dr. Prasad talks about the fact that compensation is required for the victims of bad policy. And he goes on to say, every person fired over vaccine mandates, which were unethical as they did not halt spread, should be paid restitution. I would think so. I think people that were fired should be paid restitution, their job restored, and if they were in line for any promotions, they should get them. Folks, I was at a conference that was a powerful and motivating force of energy for me. And it was ironic and more than simply coincidental, I think, that during that conference, the United Kingdom Parliament is having an inquiry into the COVID policies. And during that inquiry, citizens of the United Kingdom got a full-on view of some of the things that Boris Johnson did and said. I don't think people want to forgive Boris Johnson yet. I think they want accountability. What if someone had a nefarious agenda that would potentially get them personal gain, whether it be in dollars or power or control? What if some of the people who were so off base were able to play the stock market and really enhance their wealth? Is it thinkable that these kinds of things could have happened? I think so. Is it thinkable that COVID-19 vaccination policies were created that rewarded financially physicians if a certain threshold level of vaccination took place? Is that thinkable? I think it's more than thinkable. I've seen the documents. I've participated in it with insurance companies on a variety of things through the decades I've practiced medicine. And I saw this kind of thing happening with COVID-19 vaccine promotions. I didn't participate in any of them. Our clinic didn't do COVID-19 vaccinations. There were other resources for patients to get those vaccines. Folks, there are angry people around the world. That was very, very evident to me in the last few days. When I think about the lockdowns and the suspensions and the censorship and the mandates that took place, I'm angry. And yet we're going to have to walk that fine line of grace and mercy. But we can't forget analysis and accountability. We all have to play a part in this. Am I angry? Yes. I'm angry, but I'm less angry today than I was a month ago. And I pray that I'll be less angry a month from now than I am now. But I think there are a lot of people who need to do some real soul searching. And to simply bark out the words mea culpa, and hope that the whole thing goes away. When they'd been screaming at the top of their lungs, the sky is falling, and anybody who doesn't see it the way we see it wants to kill grandma. Accountability has to take place. But so does grace and mercy.